Good afternoon. My name is Bill Graham. As was mentioned, I'm also the president of the Rotary Dare to Be Great Global E-Club. We're a business and civic leaders from around the world that seek to be of the greatest service to the greatest number of people in our community called Earth by creating extraordinary opportunities for young people to do more with their lives than they or their parents or teachers ever dreamed possible. A few years ago, I was at a conference at the UN where Secretary General Guterres was speaking to youth delegates from around the world. He noted how the world was faced with some of the biggest challenges in history, a number of which are existential, such as climate change, pandemics, growing inequality, technology and science disruption, and the greatest number of protracted conflicts in history, to name just a few. He noted that most of today's biggest problems were global and can only be solved through increased international cooperation. He added, however, that exactly at this time of urgent need for more international cooperation, for more multilateralism, more and more people around the world were turning their backs on international cooperation and institutions. He said that his generation, my generation, had failed to convince the masses of the urgent danger of current problems and that multilateralism was a prerequisite for effectively addressing today's global problems, and that it was therefore now up to the younger generations to bring about the global mindset needed to effectively take on the world's biggest problems. Your generation has a choice. You either take ownership of your future, or you'll have to live with whatever the older generations leave behind, which is not looking very good. You may wonder what you can do to change the world, but you can't let that stop you from trying. As I mentioned, Rotary is made up of business and civic leaders from around the world. I've often spoken at Rotary Club meetings where I'd ask who among the attendees had ever raised $1 million or more for a cause and never had a hand raised. I'd then ask how many had ever even tried to raise $1 million. Again, no hands. I'd then ask how many believe they could right now go and raise $1 million. No hands. Finally, I'd ask how many had ever given serious thought as to how they might raise $1 million. Still no hands. My answer is, if you've never tried to raise $1 million and you've never even given serious thought as to how you might raise $1 million, how do you know you can't? In other words, too many people are so intimidated by big challenges that they never even try to think about how they might solve them. But if we don't try, there's no way we can succeed. Is raising $1 million too big a goal? Is it unreasonable to think that people might think about how to raise $1 million? It'd be interesting to know what Talia Lamond would say about that. Talia was 10 years old in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast of the United States. She was very bothered by the pictures on TV and all the people suffering from Katrina. She got a bunch of 10-year-old friends together, and they got some more 10-year-olds to join them, and they decided to do something about it. They decided that they would raise $1 million for the victims of Katrina. Some adults reacted with, yeah, 10-year-olds, to which they responded, no, we're serious, and we plan to do this by this date. Well, that date came and went, and they didn't raise $1 million. They raised $10 million. This resulted in lots of media attention, to which Talia responded, what's all the fuss about? Any random kid could have done it. You just got to try. To prove her point, she went home and she raised $10 million again. I guess she never got the word that raising millions of dollars is impossible, especially for someone so young. Or maybe she just realized that the only thing that's truly impossible is that which is not attempted. I noted earlier that Secretary General named several really big challenges that the world is facing that need to be solved. 6 years ago, the countries of the world came together at the UN and agreed to a set of global goals called the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, which they all pledged to try to achieve by 2030. These included ending hunger and poverty, ensuring good health, quality education, gender equality, access to affordable clean water and energy for all, as well as decent and productive work for all while reducing inequalities within and among countries and protecting the environment, managing the climate change, etc. It's believed that achievement of these goals could preclude the worst of the consequences humanity would likely otherwise face. But no, these are global goals. It's only the aggregate global result that count. Unfortunately, for many of the SDGs, we're failing to make the needed progress towards their achievement, and in some cases, we're even losing ground. But the trends which are causing the danger to our society and even our existence are not slowing down. Climate change, disruptive technology, inequality, etc., continue, and in some cases are even accelerating. Rotary consists of some 35,000 local clubs of business and civic leaders, plus some 30,000 affiliated Rotaract and Interact youth clubs, who together perform hundreds of thousands of service projects every year to make a positive difference in the world. And there are many more organizations such as Lions who do hundreds of thousands of more projects each year. The bottom line is that hundreds of thousands of grassroots efforts are failing to achieve the needed aggregate results. Too many people are doing good things and thinking if only everyone else would just do their part, that we would achieve the needed aggregate results. While independent grassroots efforts have typical problems of limited expertise, duplication of effort, reinventing of the wheel, the biggest problem is the fallacy of believing that it's enough for one to do their share in solving part of the problem and expecting others will make up the difference. This is usually a false and occasionally a fatal assumption. What does it mean when all our efforts are failing to achieve the needed results? Einstein supposedly said, repeating the same thing over and over, expecting different outcomes, is the definition of insanity. If what we're doing is not achieving the needed results, we need to find different approaches. This takes us back to the fact that so many people are unwilling to think beyond what they believe they can do. Some use their hands to help a few. Others use their heads to mobilize many to help many more. It's human nature to focus on what's local and in front of ourselves. Even in our movies, we more easily identify with the soldier who undertakes heroic actions to save their comrades than the generals in some safe office who's planning the strategy for the war. However, it's the actions of those generals that generally determine the outcomes of the battles and wars. Sergeants and other leaders in the trenches are operational leaders, just as our managers of bank branches, local stores, etc. The bottom line is that we need more strategic leaders. We need less people thinking like sergeants and more thinking like generals. We need more people thinking beyond what they can do with their hands to help a few to how they might mobilize many more people to help many more. Michelangelo said, the problem for most people is not that they set goals too high and fail, but that they set goals too low and succeed. This is what leads to sayings like, don't bite off more than you can chew. In our club, members have agreed that we need to set our goals based on what's needed without regard for whether or not we think we can do it, and then strive to find ways of achieving those goals. We believe it's when we strive to find ways to do what we don't know how to do that we grow the most. Some 60 years ago, US President John F. Kennedy inspired a nation when he said the US would put a man on the moon in 10 years. Most forget that just a few sentences later, he said, we don't yet know how we're going to do it, but we're going to do it anyway. We have to take those most serious problems the Secretary General mentioned and set the goals that are needed without regard for whether or not we know how to achieve them, and then strive like crazy to seek ways of achieving them. How big are the problems? When we look at many of the SDGs in developing countries, we quickly see that it's completely unrealistic to expect a country with only a small fraction of the per household GDP of developed countries to be able to sustainably address the problems of hunger and poverty, or to provide health and education services, or affordable access to clean water and energy, or transportation, communication, and sanitation infrastructure comparable to developed countries. This means closing the economic gaps between developing and developed countries and among communities within countries is a prerequisite to sustainably achieving the SDGs. At the same time, we recognize that it will not be possible to sustainably close the economic gap between countries if we don't sustainably close the gap in human productivity, i.e., the education gap. In other words, we need every child in developing countries to have the same competitive education striver mentality and be willing to study as hard as students in Singapore, South Korea, and China. That's the challenge. The challenge is, how do you mobilize your entire population to be devoted to getting students putting in 10 to 12, 13 hours a day, because that's what their competition is doing, and that's what it will take. That is a daunting task, especially in many rural areas where the access is still a problem. But that's what's needed. To do anything less is destined to fail. At the same time, we have to make sure that people getting that education are able to find suitable employment, because otherwise, if people attain world-class skills and abilities, but the people around them are unable to afford those skills and abilities, those people are going to migrate to places where people can afford their abilities. So we have to make sure that the economic gap is closed at the same time. Again, daunting. How do we achieve in some cases, 20 times per household GDP? That's what's going to be needed. But if we don't try, for sure we can't achieve it. Many see these as the responsibility of governments. But what if the governments don't do it? Others say, you're crazy. How can you set such goals? These are ridiculous. You can't do that. Steve Jobs said, those who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. Why? Because it's those who believe they can, they're the ones who try. And without trying, there can be no success. Remember the words of 10-year-old Talia Lavon. Any random kid could have done it. You just got to try. And remember, the only thing that is truly impossible is that which is not attempted. Finally, one more quote. If not us, then who? If not now, then when? Thank you. Dare to be great.